He changed the face of jazz forever. Miles Davis was a creative visionary, an unparalleled performer, and an influential force who even paved the way for funk and hip-hop. 100 years after the birth of the man once called the Picasso of jazz, we're taking a look at his legacy with an artist who knew him well and worked with him on 3 albums. Grammy Award-winning musician Jason Miles joins us in the studio. Welcome, Jason.
Thank you.
Now,
Pleasure to be here.
As I mentioned, you recorded with Miles Davis in the 80s,
Yes.
providing keyboard and synths and arrangements for the albums Tutu, music from Siesta, Amandla.
Yes.
We'll talk about that music in just a moment.
Sure.
But I wondered, how would you describe the man himself, Miles Davis? You got to know him
Very
as
well.
friends, yeah.
I think he was a different person to different people. You know, some people talk about, oh, Miles, you know, man, I can never get close to him. But yet, you know, here we were, and I was seeing him, my wife and I see him all the time, and we would talk about music and this because I brought him something, and I brought him something that he didn't understand. He didn't understand about the keyboards and how this stuff was happening in front of him. You know, like the sounds and how it was affecting the music. And, you know, he could tell somebody like, you know, play behind the beat a little bit, you know, or, you know, no, I don't like that change. But what could he tell me? Because I provided him something that nobody else had done before for real. And so that's how you get close to him in a way.
And that was a very innovative part of his career, those final years.
Well, yeah, well, the whole thing was that was a step that nobody had taken before, that he had the nerve to go and say, I want this album all like that. And I was there when he said that. And, you know, all of a sudden that was the change.
And it was going in a different direction. Now, as a session musician, you've worked with some of the greatest names of the late 20th century, Aretha Franklin, Whitney Houston, Diana Ross. But those years with Miles Davis seem to have left a really strong impression, I guess. Your latest album is, in fact, a tribute to the trumpetist. It's called 100 Miles for Miles Davis. Here's one of the tracks from that album. That track called Miles to Miles, I believe. Now, you've said the album's a reflection of your collaborations with Miles Davis. How do you think he and that work affected your own musical style, the direction you took? Where can you see his influence on your music?
Well, the first I can say that, like, I did on that song is everything that he was against at that point, and he didn't want to play acoustic music. And, you know, the album, first of all, that's the only song that's kind of like that. The album's funky and vibey, and, you know, it reflects really where his state of music was at, and that was like pushing forward on the groove. You know, pushing the groove forward, keeping the melody strong, you know, but bringing people in, which is why he wanted to work with Prince and Marcus, myself, you know. The influence that he had on me was huge. I mean, you know, that's why I came to New York in 1974 for my dream. You know, yes, I wanted to be in the New York music scene, but the goal was always with Miles Davis. And one night at a club in New York, I was there, we saw Miles play. And I looked and I saw him playing, and I was so close, just as close as I am to you. And I looked at my girlfriend at the time, with my wife, and I said, this is not going to happen. I can't see how this happens. And then as time goes on, you know, 12 years later, all of a sudden, wow.
There you are in the studio.
Miles, man, yeah. And you just realize what it was, that I had something at that moment that was the perfect thing, and that was being in the electronic era of synthesizers, and also not doing what everybody else was doing, going and taking it from the different edges and putting together in the music, and we had great material.
And I believe that album, the recording of it, came about quite quickly, quite naturally.
Yes, I was thinking about it for a while, but then to get the inspiration to actually sit and do it is a whole other thing. And all of a sudden, one night, I played one chord, and I went, oh, I'm onto something. And that's when I wrote the song 100 Miles. And after I finished it, in about 3 weeks, it took me to finish the song. Then I played it for some people and said, well, what else are you doing? I'm going, I just was going to release this song. And they came up to me, you're crazy, man. You got to go and make an album. Stuff is great. And I sat down for 6 weeks and I wrote all this new music and recorded it all. It was like, tense, but this is what it came out. I couldn't be happier.
One of the key moments in Miles Davis' career was the release of Kind of Blue in 1959, his masterpiece, one of the most influential albums ever produced, really. It's gone platinum 5 times. What would you say, as a musician, was so revolutionary about that record at that time?
That people were playing bebop at that time, and it was built around a certain kind of structure with the songs, fast melodies, this. And then he met Bill Evans, and Bill Evans found the modality in the music where it was basically maybe sitting on a chord and expressing yourself in a freer sense, not being so constricted by the chord changes and by the structure of the song. And when you have songs like, So What and flamenco sketches and everything like that, it brought a whole other piece. And if you listen to Bill's piece, Peace it's called, you see where the whole thing started. And that was a great, Blue and Green, that was a great influence on him. And Miles, like I said, he had his ear to the ground all the time. And when he heard that, the guys might say, no, we don't want to play that. But he said, you're playing that. Yeah. And when they did, they started realizing, wow, we're on to, there's something new happening here. Yeah. And that changed music again.
That vision that he had. And also back at the start of his career in the 40s, when he was honing his sound in New York, he also made his first trip to Paris, somewhere that he'd return throughout his career for tours and concerts. He also did a soundtrack for Louis Malle, cinema, Elevated to the Gallows in 1958. He received a knighthood here in 1991, just before he died. What do you think France represented for him in terms of music for Miles Davis?
I think it represented not a very racial issue that he was going through in the United States. I think he felt a sense of freedom here. I think he felt a sense of appreciation and about how the people just wanted, to take that journey with him. It didn't matter. They respected where he came from. They respected the musician where he came from. They respected the black musician where they came from. And, when he got here, he had a name already, but they were never that close to seeing, like, in the presence of genius. And he presented that over here to them, and he apprenticed the vibe that when he appreciated something, he let you know that in his own way. And he really loved it. He loved it. Well, I wrote a song on this album, Jean Moreau, who, how could you not love Jean Moreau?
A nod to his Parisian ties there.
Exactly.
And your own career, of course, started in the US, the melting pot of 1970s New York jazz scene. Then you transpose that musical background to Europe. You record and perform with your fellow musicians of the Lisbon Electric Quartet.
Yes.
How has that changed your approach to music? What have you taken away from that European shift?
Well, I think it'd be interesting to say that, when I came here, I have 50 years in me, So I come here and I observe what is happening here. And my whole thing was like, well, there's people here, but I want to show them what I'm bringing from New York with me. And I want to see if I can find people that'll meld what I have and find a sense of discovery within themselves to say, I like where Jason Miles is coming from. I want to try to do that and see what I can get from them. Because I feel like I'm bringing the city over here. There's not much you can say to people about you're bringing jazz someplace and you spent 50 years in New York making it. I would think more people would be curious about what is he bringing than almost what can we bring to him. What you can bring to me is the culture that's here in Europe, the culture, the vibe of the people, the different way of life over here that has definitely influenced me.
A new chapter for jazz fusion, I guess. And while, of course, his artistic genius is largely undisputed today, Miles Davis is a complex figure, I guess, in the art scene, someone who was known for having difficult relationships with women in particular. When you look at contemporary music today, though, where do you see his legacy?
I see his legacy as almost for not everybody, because there's different moments in jazz and there's different elements of jazz, whether it's avant-garde or whatever. But I see any serious jazz musician really starting there with Miles. You start with him, and then you build what's happening. Well, look, when I heard Bitches Brew for the first time, I might as well have left school at that point because that's what I wanted to do. Yeah. I just kind of hung in there for the next few years.
And speaking of jazz greats, of course, a contemporary of Miles Davis, Sonny Rollins, has just left us at 95 years old, the end of another era, I guess. What do you think Sonny Rollins' contribution was to the scene?
I think his contribution was a sense of freedom and a sense of being his own person. I mean, he didn't listen how he should be playing it. He took his own path, and when he wasn't happy with that path, he stopped until he could find himself again, And Sonny had a sound that nobody else had, and he swung. It's so easy for people to try to sound and play like each other. How many times can you listen to somebody and say, he sounds like him, or he sounds like him? But how many times can you hear like a Miles Davis and go, oh, that's Miles, I hear Sonny Rollins. Oh, that's got to be Sonny, I mean, I've been around that situation so many times in my life, and that's what it is. Creating the individuality with you, where you're recognized for your sound, and you're recognized for what that sound is in the music. And Sonny was special.
Yeah, really, but definitely an era of one-off, unique voices. Well, Jason Miles, thank you so much for joining us today.
It's been really great. Thank you for having me.
We'll wrap up the show with another perspective on the late, great jazz musician. A new documentary called Miles Davis, Birth of the Cool, revisits the artist's creative journey from his passion for innovation to the shadows cast by his turbulent personal life. We'll leave you with a clip of that film, streaming on the Arte channel. Otherwise, do join us here next time on Arts 24. There's more news coming up just after this.
A lot of the old guys thought that if you went to school, it would make you play like you were white. If you learned something from theory, you would lose the feeling in your playing. I wanted to see what was going on in all of music. All I ever wanted to do was communicate what I felt through music.